What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, February 10th, 2017. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Quick little program note, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 with her unique perspective on the world. And in response to a lot of email we have gotten, we're going to put her in the front chair for part of that hour so you can get a much better look at her, because we get a lot of emails, why are you making her sit at the back of the bus? Well, we don't have enough room here for side-by-side seating, maybe in our next establishment, as it were. But we're going to put the lovely Lady Claire up front, and you'll get another reason why I love her so much. All right, on to the news here. A lot of people still talking about this court battle with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Actually, I think we should call it the Ninth Circus Court of Appeals, because these clowns have obviously forgotten about things like the law and common sense, and they're basically there pushing their own personal political agenda, which is liberalism and open borders and the New World Order and global government and all these other things, which is just crumbling all over the place here. Now, the reality is that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has been described as a rogue court, and 80% of their rulings eventually get reversed at a higher level. So they're definitely not plugged in to the current flow of jurisprudence. They're just out there trying to legislate from the bench or politicize from the bench, and they've got a terrible, terrible track record. Judge Napolitano is out there saying Donald Trump has a legitimate complaint regarding the politicalization of the bench. Because if you go back to the original model for the government and the 3 separate equal establishments, politics is the realm of the executive branch and Congress, not the judicial. The judicial branch is oversight, and the only court that is allowed to interpret the law is the Supreme Court, which the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is not. So, one more time for the really slow learners out there in California on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Title 8 U.S. Code Section 1182. Direct quote. Whenever the President finds that the entry of any aliens or of any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may, by proclamation, and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. Whenever the Attorney General finds that a commercial airline has failed to comply with regulations of the Attorney General relating to requirements of airlines for the detection of fraudulent documents used by passengers traveling to the United States, including the training of personnel in such detection, the Attorney General may suspend the entry of some or all aliens transported to the United States by such airlines. Donald Trump's 90-day travel moratorium is the letter of the law, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has basically come down with a reversible ruling. And by so doing, they have opened up a window of opportunity for those who wish ill to our country, who were caught by surprise by the suddenness of Trump's invocation of Title VIII, which was the goal, catch them off guard. Now they've got another chance to come here. And all it's going to take is one terror attack by one person coming from that list of 7 countries, and it doesn't matter if they're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, atheist, Pastafarian, Scientologist. It's going to vindicate Trump was right, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals was absolutely flat out wrong. Now, here is where this issue of bureaucratic inertia comes on in. Because despite the plans to build a wall on the border and tighten border security, the Department of Homeland Security websites are still advertising safe zones for illegal aliens where they are sheltered from U.S. Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And the website basically is offering a how-to guide for illegals on how to get in here and stay in here, which, by the way, is itself another criminal violation of Title VIII, which makes it a crime to transport, harbor, support, or employ anybody who is not supposed to be in the United States of America. Donald Trump needs to start firing and replacing a lot more people. Because it's not just the corporate media who's against him, it's not just Congress who's opposing him. There are a lot of people supposedly working for him that are pushing back against him. A lot of the Obama holdovers, the Loretta Lynch holdovers, the Eric Holder holdovers, they need to be gotten rid of. Another big problem that is surfacing is that there is a massive amount of fraud and corruption in the U.S. refugee program. Now, before I elucidate further on that, we're going to take a moment to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. But looking at the refugee program, it is fraught with fraud and corruption. Now, refugee resettlement, where they take the refugees and they send them all over the country and spread them all over, it's sold as this humanitarian endeavor. But basically, the program increases the amount of taxpayer money flowing into the pockets of the resettlement contractors. And they're not the only ones who are benefiting from this, because the program has become a cheap source of labor for corporate America. We have more than 90 million American citizens in this country willing and able to work who have not been able to find jobs for months and years. We should not be giving jobs to non-citizens until we have full employment of the American people. That's just common sense when you look at the condition of our economy. Now, one of the things that's come on out is the resettlement contractors have been making claims that the vast majority of refugees are self-supporting within 3 or 4 months of arrival. As a matter of fact, that is outright propaganda and media spin. And most of these refugees are remaining on various welfare programs for far longer. 60.2% of refugees are still on food stamps after 5 years in the United States of America. Now, many of these refugees do not actually meet the legal definition of a refugee. The 1951 Geneva Convention defines a refugee as a person displaced by a well-founded fear of persecution due to their religious, political, or ethnic affiliation. Under that definition, refugees seeking greater economic opportunity have no standing as refugees eligible for permanent resettlement. That's just it. Now, back in 2008, the P3 family reunification program was suspended when it was discovered the vast majority of East African refugees who applied to come to America under the program lied on their applications. Only 20% of those trying to enter the U.S. claiming to be family members of refugees already here were actually related to anyone that they claim to be related to, according to DNA testing. It's just fake and fraud and corruption. All right, let's take a couple of phone calls. Bob in Las Vegas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Have you spoken about this story about Elliott Abrams not getting the position, the State Department job?
No, I actually hadn't heard that, but like I said yesterday, Elliott Abrams may have been Donald Trump's equivalent of Coco Chanel's bright orange feather. But I know a lot of people were opposed to him. Rand Paul was standing firm on that, and I certainly was not happy with that. In fact, there are hints that Donald Trump is just now waking up to how much his administration is being infiltrated by the neocons, and we are hearing rumors that there could be a major White House shakeup in the very near future.
That's good to hear. Well, this story, I'm just on my phone, and it says, first on CNN, Trump nixes Elliott Abrams for State Department job. So
good.
We'll see. But, Mike, on that appeals court decision, the 3-0 decision that St. Hillary tweeted out to everybody to see,
yes.
What can the people who bring this case to court, can they have their pick of which circuit to choose from? Can they just say, oh, let's take the case to this circuit? There are a bunch of radical left-wing judges sitting on the bench. Let's go there. Can they do that?
I know with a regular.
Is that how it's done?
I know with a regular criminal or civil proceeding to the normal courts, the judge in the courtroom is assigned at random. In theory, that system may be rigged as well. But in the case of the appeals court, you can in fact select which court you're going to appeal to, and you can go judge shopping.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, you said it yesterday. Trump. I think it's too little, too late. I think we should have got Trump 20 years ago after Clinton instead of George W. I think too much damage has been done on these courts. You've got these activist judges who want to legislate from the bench. I think it's really too late. I think pretty soon we're going to have a situation where these politicians are going to order Americans to accommodate these refugees in their own homes.
Well, let me push back on that a little bit. We all know that the Supreme Court judges have that position for life or until they voluntarily decide to resign or retire. The appellate judges, I think they can be removed for malfeasances, and certainly looking at an 80% reversal rate on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, it seems to me that they're not very good judges.
Yeah, but what makes it think? I mean, I think it was Kellyanne Conway said, or someone said the Supreme Court will rule in favor of Trump's ban, but the Supreme Court is 4-4 at this point. I think it would probably be a deadlock.
Yeah, at which point the lower court's ruling would stand.
Right.
But Trump still is supposed to be filling that Ninth Supreme Court seat, and he may let this just sit on hold until that ninth judge is there, and then take it to the Supreme Court, because it's up to him to take it to the Supreme Court. Because the plaintiffs at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal won their position. They can't say, all right, let's rush it to the Supreme Court and get their decision on it before the new judge is in. It doesn't work that way.
Well, I just hope this Gorsuch is a Scalia clone and not a David Souter in disguise. I'm worried about this guy.
Well, that's what we're hearing, is that he's very Scalia-like, and that would be a very good thing to balance out that court. And we don't really know that even the existing court would necessarily tie, because ultimately the law is on Trump's side. And
right.
We've seen the Supreme Court go to ridiculous extremes to protect the political elites. And of course, I'm thinking back to when Alan Favish took his Freedom of Information Act for the crime scene photos of the Vince Foster murder all the way to the Supreme Court because of all the eyewitnesses who said there was a second gunshot wound on the body, which obviously mitigated against the claim of suicide. And the Supreme Court denied it with this ridiculous idea that dead people still have a right to privacy.
Yeah. Well, Mike, on that Judicial Watch decision, you had said that it was taken to a court that was the judge was a Clinton appointee. How was that court chosen? I think it was Clayman, I believe you said, right, from Judicial Watch?
Yeah, Larry Clayman. Well, he was the founder of Judicial Watch. He's not with them anymore, but he's got his own group down there in Florida. In theory, the case are assigned to random judges with a computer system, but we know from the elections the computers can be hacked. In any event, the correct thing for the judge to do would have been to recuse himself over the obvious conflict of interest, but he didn't. And again, judges can be replaced, and I think it's time to maybe start sweeping out some of those courtrooms of these individuals who are simply not complying with the Constitution and the rule of law.
Yeah, well, hopefully Trump will also do some house cleaning in the White House. Oh, Mike, last thing, I'm going to be taking a foreign trip, and I'm going to pick up some things for you and Claire. How do I send? It could be a box. I don't know how large it's going to be. How do I send it? What address do I send this package to?
Well, you can use the address at the donations page, and you need to be aware it's been changed. Our postal box company is about to go out of business. So we have a new address for postal mail to be sent to, so you can just use that, okay?
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mike.
All right, and thank you in advance for whatever it is that you're going to send. Just be aware that any packages that arrive ticking or meowing are dumped in a pail of water before opening.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we're going to switch over to Greg in New York. Aloha, Greg. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Thank you for the nice humor, getting through all this news and sorting through all the BS for us.
You're welcome.
Anyway, I was having a discussion earlier regarding the Soros-funded protests that are happening across, some of the major cities. I was wondering what your take is on a possible endgame or a reason for him to do this at this point.
I think Soros is trying to get a color revolution going here in the United States. Soros has dreamt of his single global government New World Order for almost all of his life. And you need to remember, he got a lot of that from his former bosses in Nazi Germany. Soros actually helped the Nazis round up other Jews, and he's even stated on video he feels absolutely no remorse for that. So that gives you a clue into his mental state. And he dreams of this one world government. Maybe he's going to call it the Fifth Reich or something nonsensical like that. But he's aware he doesn't have very much longer to live. And at this point, it looks like he's willing to literally spend his entire fortune trying to push through the New World Order, which has to be very alarming to his 5 children, because I'm sure they were all looking forward to the day when they inherited all that money.
Yeah, and you gotta imagine that he's probably collaborating with some others too, and none of them seem to be surfacing. They're staying in the shadows.
Oh no, quite the contrary. Hillary Clinton is definitely one of them. Anybody who's out there pushing for the open borders, Angela Merkel is definitely on board with the New World Order. Everybody in Brussels and the European Union, they understand they're a sub-assembly of the New World Order. Same thing with everybody in the United States who supported the North American Union and NAFTA. That's all more stepping stones and sub-assemblies to that global government. But it is all starting to fall apart, and Soros is panicking, and so he's put pedal to the metal, which all that's done is call more attention to his hand in all of this.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time. We're watching everyone just wake up around us. I've been having some really good discussions with people, and we just got to be careful to take the high road and not get on the attack the way a lot of the other side seems to be doing regularly.
We need to be very careful because the other side, in their constant attacks and shrillness, they're actually doing themselves and their cause a great deal of harm. And so we need to walk a little bit of a higher path. We need to be a little bit more rational and cautious. And not get reckless and not get sucked into name-calling or the violence, because the American people are quickly forming an opinion about what's going on, and it is not sympathetic to those who are pushing for this color revolution, which is why it is doomed to fail.
I agree 100%. Well, thank you very much, Michael, and you have a nice weekend down there.
All right, same to you, and we're going to let you go. Now, getting on back to the reactions to the Ninth Circus Court of Appeals, Sean Hannity is out there saying the Democrats and these unaccountable judges are gambling with the lives of the American people, and all it's going to take is one terror attack by one migrant from one of those 7 countries, and this situation is going to explode right in the face of the liberals. And, Hillary Clinton couldn't resist the urge to taunt Donald Trump about his defeat at the Ninth Circus Court of Appeals, and she's out there dancing around her happy dance, and only once again proving what a childish individual she is. Maybe she's getting senile at her age with all this childish behavior. We're going to take a break here for some commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and let me get the volume back up there a little bit here. We're going to take another phone call, then we're going to do some news for a little bit here. Sherry in Fredericksburg, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. There's 2 things I've been wanting to talk about. First, I'm going to just say real quick that I saw Whale Rider, and there's something at the end I just want to quote, and I feel this way too, that our people will continue to go forward all together and with all our strengths. I feel very hopeful of that. That was the message at the end. Okay, now that put aside, I have something I was looking everywhere what I had about the New Madrid Fault. This kind of relates to the pipeline, but I'm going to give people some information here. There's a special, I think it was on around 2005. It was on PBS, KLRU out of Austin, Texas. And the special was it was about the New Madrid Fault, was called Rumblings of Imminence. IMMINENCE, Rumblings of Imminence. And the subtitle was The New Madrid Seismic Zone. Now, the felt area or the continuation area is different from like faults other places, because it's different because most faults lie at the boundary of a continental plate. Yes. But this earthquake instead is in the Midwest, and it has a very broad felt region, or continuation area. It does go a little bit into the north eastern corner of Kansas, but primarily it's where the Mississippi River runs past Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas. But this geostrata, the geology strata, is a series of layers of rock. They're flat, they're stacked. That's where they go in and frack and everything. And I think a big danger here is the damage is so much greater than it is like on the East Coast or West Coast or like California, because of this, because it resonates out so much more acutely. There's a thing called subsidence. Is where the land
let me step in here just a little tiny bit. The propagation of energy from any kind of a fault rupture is very much determined by the material it's going through. If you are on absolute bedrock, you will receive that seismic energy as a very high frequency rattle. If you are on alluvial fill or any kind of loose sedimentary structure, the waves come through as these big, long period swinging waves. And so it has a lot to do with the local geology rather than where the fault happens to be. Now, the last big quake on the New Madrid Fault, of course, was a 9.9. That's an estimate only because they didn't have instruments back there. Fortunately, at least for the moment, they're not doing any fracking in the immediate area of the New Madrid seismic zone. But it's like the big one on the San Andreas. It's going to happen somewhere, somehow, sometime, people do need to be prepared for it. And unfortunately, too many of the people who live in that area have the attitude that earthquakes are something that happens out in California, on the West Coast, or over in Italy, and they're not as well prepared. I don't know if the building codes in the area are up to current seismic standards or not. But you know, bad things are happening. Apparently, a lot of the Icelandic volcanoes are starting to rumble, and we're actually seeing an increased amount of quake activity around the Big Island here, along with the ongoing eruption of Kilauea.
And a lot of people are worried about water. Lots of water from Chicago all the way down to New Orleans to Louisiana. And there is a New Madrid Historical Museum that may have a website, and then you can see this felt area with the main part of it, because when that thing hit back in the 1811, 1812, it rang bells in Boston. I mean, this is an amazing documentary. And now it didn't talk, but it was felt all the way to the Rockies. You'll just have to see this rumbling is at the imminence.
Well, a 9.9 is going to have a long, long reach, regardless of where it happens. Look at the quake that led to the meltdown at Fukushima, where it was rattling and swaying buildings all over Japan. You know, it has to do with the power. Each increase in magnitude is actually a multiplier of 10. Okay. Anyway, got to let you go, Sherry. Got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to close the phone lines for a little while because I got a bunch of stuff to get through before the Lady Claire joins us here. Finishing up on this issue about the Ninth Circus Court basically blocking or rather upholding the stay on Donald Trump's 90-day travel moratorium. Bill Mitchell has come out with the observation that Trump has succeeded in actually maneuvering the Democrats into appearing to stand up for terrorism. Politics is perception, and Bill is absolutely right. People are saying, what's going on here with the Ninth Circus Court of Appeals and all these open border people? They're exposing us to terror attacks. And I think that's illustrated because over in Paris, they've just arrested 4 people for planning a suicide attack in Paris. They were found with explosives that match the explosives used in some of the other bombings in France. One of the people arrested is a 16-year-old girl. And again, you can't really know who is or is not when they're coming on through those border checkpoints. Now, 4 Muslim immigrants have been charged with murder of a man up in Calgary, Canada. So the open border thing is working out for them really good. Now, do you remember back on the inauguration, there were riots, and there have been riots ever since here. And everybody's out there, the Black Lives Matter, oh, we're standing for our First Amendment rights here. Okay, and let's be very, very clear here. The First Amendment guarantees your right to freedom of speech. It does not recognize a right of freedom to riot, cause damage, attack people. You need to remember that. Peaceful demonstrations and rational discussion are a protected right. Running down the street, breaking windows at Starbucks is not protected free speech. And 146 anti-Trump protesters who were rioting on Inauguration Day are finding that out because they have just been indicted for felony rioting, and it brings the total to 209 people who are facing a maximum of 10 years in prison and a fine of up to $25,000 each for felony rioting charges. Now, you know what the liberals are going to do. Oh, these are martyrs to free speech, and Donald Trump is being a tyrant, showing that people are not allowed to protest. Nobody's going after demonstrations and picketers and protesters. They're going after people who are committing damage. And you need to remember that. And all these useful idiots who got caught up in George Soros' color revolution are now about to find out he's not going to pay their fines. He's not going to lift a finger to help them keep out of jail. And I had previously suggested the smart thing for Donald Trump to do would be, after they have had their day in court and they've been convicted, to use his authority as president to commute their sentences in order that they not be martyrs in prison for the liberals to point to. Unfortunately, since the violence has been continuing and is escalating, that's no longer a workable plan, because Trump is going to have to show that he's coming down on violent protesters and rioters very, very hard, or it is going to continue to spiral out of control. All right, now then, as you know, the Democratic National Committee is thrashing around looking for a new chairman. And one of the candidates for that position, Tom Perez, slipped up because while he was campaigning to be the next chair of the DNC, he actually came out and admitted the primary process was rigged for Hillary Clinton. And he said, and I quote, "We heard loudly and clearly yesterday from Bernie supporters the process was rigged, and it was, and you've got to be honest about it." So, yes, the election was rigged. And boy, have you seen that evolution? In September, President Obama was saying it's impossible to rig the elections. They're spread all over the place. It's too diffuse. It could never possibly be done. Then we get into October, and Hillary Clinton is saying Russia's rigging our elections. And then you get into Jill Stein's recount. The elections are being rigged. And then, of course, now you've got the NAACP screaming, don't you dare investigate election fraud in this country. Now, Jerome Corsi wrote an article over at RINF.com in which he says that because he had credentials to be part of the traveling press during Mitt Romney's campaign, that he got to look at Democratic Party vote fraud up close. And you need to remember, there is that ridiculous consent decree that arose out of another vote fraud case that the GOP lost, which basically said the GOP cannot investigate election fraud without the permission of the Democratic Party, which was a carte blanche license to engage in massive fraud. And Corsi is going on about how the Supreme Court ruled you've got to have voter ID, but all these Soros-funded Democratic operatives last year were running around to states filing legal challenges to voter ID laws and getting them turned down. Under President Obama, the Department of Justice opposed voter ID laws. And apparently, analysts are looking back at Florida and found something like 118,000 voters that the state of Florida didn't think had a right to vote. And that was enough to swing the election. So it is happening. Now, underscoring this, apparently there is a Mexican woman who is looking at 8 years in prison, followed by deportation for voter fraud. And she went before the judge and jury and said, well, she was confused about her citizenship status, and she thought she was allowed to vote, but the jury didn't buy it. After all the paperwork to become a legal resident or legal citizen and have the right to vote, you're going to know what your status is. But, of course, we had Obama out there on TV literally encouraging illegals to vote. And he's not going to lift a finger to help this woman. She's just another useful idiot who got caught voting when she shouldn't. Now, here is an interesting story. Alex Jones was interviewing Jerome Corsi. And Corsi came on out saying that Donald Trump isn't content with all these globalists and neocons who have wormed their way into his White House staff, and he is looking at his chief of staff, Reince Priebus, as the cause. That Priebus is on board with bringing in globalists and neocon types, and Corsi is saying that Trump may be on the verge of firing his chief of staff and replacing a huge number of the people that have been brought on in. I think Trump needs to do a complete vacuum out of the White House. And not just the people who have infiltrated his administration, but all these Obama holdovers who are still on board with this liberal New World Order globalist agenda. And I mean, Trump, there are people out here who are on your side, who are qualified to do these jobs. Start getting them in there. Now, here's an illustration of why all these protests from Black Lives Matter and everything are bought and paid for frauds. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos went down to pay a visit to a Washington, D.C. public school, and there was a big protest, Black Lives Matter, with the signs, and they literally prevented her from entering this school. And here's the kicker. The particular school in question is 94% black. You see that little disconnect there? These Black Lives Matter people didn't care about the fact that the school had a 94% black population. We're going to just stand up and scream that we don't like Betsy DeVos. Now, do you remember actor turned performance artist Shia LaBeouf? Was in the Transformer movies, was in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And he's right out there on the fringe of liberalism. And he set up this art installation at a museum, at the Museum of the Moving Image in Queens, called He Will Not Divide Us. This was a 24-hour live webcam outside the museum that began 3 weeks ago, the day Trump was inaugurated. And basically the idea is people would step up and say, he will not divide us, into the camera, repeating it however many, and people would tune on in theory, to watch this repetition of the drones. But apparently this art installation has become a hotbed of liberal violence against conservatives. People who went to this installation and say, you know, I like Trump, and they got attacked, and the museum has had to shut it down. And this is a huge embarrassment because it was originally intended to continue to operate as long as Donald Trump was in office. Well, Donald Trump is still in office, and this so-called art installation is now gone. And by the way, there's a very interesting video by a recognized artist. It's on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. And it talks about how what we think of as art today really isn't anymore. And it's a good video to watch about how art has stopped being enlightening, inspiring, communicative, and it's become self-indulgent, arrogant, conceited. And I followed it up with some comments of my own as well. But we have to start recognizing that a lot of things that are called art really aren't. Now, over in the world of corporate media, CNN now wants to banish Kellyanne Conway from the airwaves. CNN is escalating this blacklisting situation. Well, if you're not going to give us interviews from the White House, we're not going to let your people on our channel. And then CNN wonders why their ratings are in huge decline. Apparently, CNN's claim that they matched Fox News's ratings during the inauguration was another complete fabrication. Now, again, going back to CNN, Chris Cuomo, who's one of those people whose entire sense of self-value is based on always finding something to be offended about, is now out there declaring by his imperial edict that calling corporate media fake news is as offensive as calling a black person the N-word. That's a bit of a reach. I think he's trying to somehow link our opposition to being lied to with being racist. Okay? If you don't like being lied to, you're obviously a racist. Well, Chris, fake news, fake news, fake news, fake news. Go ahead, be offended. I don't care. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog, apparently during his rise to stardom, Stephen Colbert was basically taking orders and direction from the Clinton Foundation, both when he was with The Daily Show and then later on with his own show, and now that he's moved on over to take over the Letterman show, the CBS's Late Show. But he is an owned media personality. And he's a lot of fun, and I really liked him. But when he was doing the Colbert Report, after a while, we stopped watching because the liberal bias was so obvious. Now, over at the New York Slimes, boy, talk about jumping the shark. The New York Times is trying to rebuff Donald Trump's comments about how you think that we're innocent here? And, you know, Putin bad, we're good, and was over at Fox News. Bill O'Reilly called Vladimir Putin a killer, and Trump came back to him and said, do you really think we're all that innocent? Which is a valid, legitimate point to make. So the New York Slimes has literally come on out saying that U.S. wars promote freedom and democracy, unlike the Russian wars of conquest. I would rate that one as a 9.2 on the Pinocchio scale, which originally only went up to 4, but we've had to invent some new numbers for the escalating degree of mendacity. But I mean, does the New York Times actually think the American people are so juvenile and infantile that they're going to actually fall for this idea that Russia's wars are all about conquest and U.S. wars are all about promoting freedom and democracy, especially when we look back at these innocent Iraqis being tortured to death to find weapons of mass destruction that never really existed? The corporate media is rapidly making themselves irrelevant. And their problem is they are trapped by their business model. And they, too, as well paid as they are useful idiots for those corporate and government interests above them. And just like Soros will not lift a finger to help all those protesters from the inauguration who are looking at 10 years in jail, the corporate masters and government masters of corporate media, they don't care what happens to the people actually working at corporate media. They're just going to say, go on pushing the propaganda, keep on going, until the corporate media just absolutely collapses and they're all out of work. And the people who've been giving the orders simply won't care. They'll be busy trying to find some other way to regain control over the minds of the American people. Now then, let's take a look at the war zones. The Syrian army is now clashing with the pro-Turkish militants near Al-Bab. It's getting kind of hard to figure out who the good guy is and who the bad guy is, especially when you've got what appears to be a three-way contest going on. Adding more to the confusion is that now that Trump is in the White House, U.S. policy in Syria appears to be shifting away from bombing hospitals and factories and food storage into actually targeting ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And apparently U.S. forces are now trying to take back Raqqa from ISIS. Now you're going to love this story. This is great. I didn't know whether I should put this in the war news or down in the computer section because it belongs in both. And there is a lesson here. Okay, apparently the Ukrainian army literally uses an Android app to aim their D-30 122 millimeter towed howitzer artillery. That is a big gun. That is a very, very powerful gun. It can cause a lot of damage. And they wanted to aim it and turn it and fire it without being close enough to have it deafen them. So they're using this Android app. And here is where it gets really good. The Android app has malware in it that sends the location of the gun crew to the rebels. And that's why Kiev has lost 80% of those D-30 howitzers. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha America, welcome back to the show here. And I think this story with the Android app used to control Kiev's howitzers, reporting to the enemy where those howitzers are actually located, is a real-world example of cyber warfare that's going on out there. By the way, little bit of trivia, since we were talking to that other lady about earthquakes along the New Madrid Fault. Seismometers that are used to track earthquakes were originally developed as a device to try and find the location of artillery by picking up the vibration coming through the ground. And then somebody figured, oh, that would be really useful for other things here as well. Now, we're going to talk about the economy for a little bit, and we were talking yesterday about how gold had risen quite a bit, 6% year-to-date, and had gone upward for 5 consecutive days. And yesterday I said, all right, at this point, they're going to find some way to drive gold down, and sure enough, gold prices retreat as equities trade to a new all-time high. They're back there rigging the market, the plunge protection team. And they're hoping that you will look at the soaring stock market numbers and believe that your money is best left in Wall Street or those negative interest rate savings accounts at the bank. But sky-high numbers on the stock market are not always a good thing. Now, if the prices on the stocks are based on the stock's actual value, then it's a good thing. But if you're using market forces, supply and demand, speculation, to drive the prices up so that you're buying and selling the stocks very quickly to make your profit, and you don't care what the actual earnings for the stock happen to be over the long term, then it's a bad thing, because you get into a condition called an overvalued market, which is where we are right now. You look at all those sky-high numbers on the stock market, the Dow Jones Industrial, for example, and yet all of the companies in that Dow Jones analysis had very poor earnings reports. So you can see how disconnected that is. This all began back during Bill Clinton's administration, where they were running up the stock market to wave it as a banner that the economy was doing really, really good. At the same time, they were plundering the cash set aside for the baby boomer retirements out of the Social Security Trust Fund. So, over in Europe, they're accelerating their move to begin the elimination of paper money, so that no matter what you do, you will require a plastic card for which the bank will charge you a modest fee. And, of course, it will allow the government to track you. Everything that you buy, newspaper, candy bar, stick of gum, jelly donut, the government will know all about you. And mostly, this is just another way to enforce your dependence on the banks. More about that when we come back from station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about this push toward a cashless society. They've already started doing it in India. It's almost locked the economy up down there. It's caused all kinds of horrible problems. But the people who want the cashless society don't care if you are inconvenienced as long as you are their slave. And this idea of a cashless society is to make you totally dependent on the bankers so that you will be their slaves and they will be your masters. And that you will require the bank's permission for anything that you do in life, like buying a jelly donut. And if the financial institution is also your insurance provider, we could get to a situation where you go on in to buy the jelly donut, and your little card comes back saying, sorry, you've had too many sweets this week and we do not approve this transaction. It's sort of a cybernetic version of feudalism, where everything that you do is by the leave of the lords and ladies and the nobility, and you're not allowed to do anything without their blessing, as it were. The other aspect of the cashless society, of course, is to protect the banks. If they make a mistake and the banks start to fail, in the past you could go to the bank, pound on the door, and say, give me my money. That was called a run on the bank, and bankers don't like that. They don't like to give money back. So if there's no cash, there is no means by which you can get your money out of the banking system. All you can do is move it from financial institution to financial institution, and if they're all going down at the same time, you are stuck. And of course, everywhere they're talking about cashless society, they're also including bans on any portable store of value such as gold or silver, platinum, and so forth. Remember, dependency is slavery. All tyrants make you dependent on what they're doing. That's what led to the American Revolution, where King George III made us dependent on banknotes loaned at interest from the Bank of England. King George III made us dependent on the knitting mills of Manchester and Leeds to buy our cloth rather than make our own. We had to buy all of our products from the British East India Company. We were not allowed any other choices. Dependency, dependency, dependency. And that's why after the American Revolution, they call that holiday Independence Day. They don't call it Freedom Day or we kicked the British butt back across the Atlantic Day. It's Independence Day. The day when we stopped being forced to be dependent on this guy wearing a crown. And they're trying to bring it back. That's what the bankers are trying to do. They're trying to bring back that system of government in order to protect their private central banking scam. The two go hand in hand. So, moving on down here, interestingly enough, German economist Norbert Haring was on the Richie Allen show lately and said, as far as he can tell, the biggest push for this cashless society agenda is coming from Bill Gates and George Soros. And that has some interesting ramifications. Now, I don't know about Bill Gates, but George Soros certainly includes a global private central bank as part of his plans for the New World Order, to keep us all as debt slaves to our masters for eternity. Now, the U.S. is getting ready to impose a 100% import tariff on 90 kinds of European agricultural products. And, of course, Europe is just absolutely furious. And Trump is basically addressing the fact that we have a $136 billion surplus, a deficit in trade because the European Union refuses to import U.S. beef that's treated with hormones. Now, I'm kind of an old-fashioned guy. I grew up at a time where, in order to be successful in business, you made or grew what the customer wanted to buy. And you would do that, the customer would buy it, they'd get the product they wanted, you would get the money you wanted, everybody went home happy. But the current model seems to be U.S. corporations make the cheapest and lousiest products they possibly can, and then they force the customer to buy it. You will buy our chemically treated food. You're not allowed to have any other choice. That was a big part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, to basically force countries around the world who don't want our GMO agriculture to accept it. And the reason for that heavy-handed approach is very simple. The genie is out of the bottle. The United States can't go back to being GMO-free. It would take draconian steps, like they did in Hungary, of literally burning all the fields where GMO crops had been grown, and you still wouldn't be sure about that. Pollen can last 3 years, which means after you have contaminated a farm field with GMO crops, you have to let it sit unused for 3 years before you bring in a new natural organic crop. So, yes, we made this lousy mistake with GMO food. Nobody wants it. Well, we'll sign a treaty that forces them to buy it. Ban GMO labeling, and if we can't sell it to foreign countries, we'll make the American people eat it and pay for it. That's how fascism operates. We're going to take a moment here to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we have a caller waiting on the line. Reed in New Jersey, thank you for waiting. What is on your mind?
Mike, are you there? Sorry, the phone broke up.
Oh, okay. No, I'm here and I can hear you.
Okay, yes. Thank you. Well, I understand the travel ban which Trump instituted with the 7 Middle Eastern countries. I understand it, but why wasn't Saudi Arabia put on that list?
Well, the list actually, the list actually came out of the Bush and Obama administrations, and Saudi Arabia, of course, is supposedly our friend.
11 out of 15 of the hijackers were from Saudi Arabia from 9/11.
No, they weren't. No, they were being framed. In fact, one of the named Saudi 9/11 hijackers is a pilot for the Saudi National Airline, and they successfully sued for defamation.
Well, I mean, aside from that, okay. And what's your opinion on the sanctions and everything, considering the fact that Iran is not a militaristically oriented country in terms of an offensive militaristic unit? They don't seem to want to invade other countries, but Trump wants to kind of put sanctions on them, and that puts us in a conundrum with Russia. And
yeah, it does. It's a very, very dangerous move. Again, too much of Donald Trump's worldview is based on what he's been seeing on TV all these years, and he's got to go through this apotheosis of realizing the scale that he and all of us have been lied to by corporate media during our entire lifetime. But you need to understand. Hang on. Let me address your questions before you run on to the next one. The issue with Iran has nothing to do with their aggression. It's a similar situation to Iraq. Iraq was not about weapons of mass destruction or aiding al-Qaeda or 9/11. The real issue is that because the United States has allowed its manufacturing to decline for the last 30 years, because the United States has engaged in this dangerous experiment with GMO, and nobody wants to buy our GMO agriculture, the only thing that is still holding up the U.S. economy is all these nations who are having to borrow at interest U.S. dollars to purchase natural resources like oil. And what happened was back in 2002, Saddam Hussein got permission from the United Nations to sell Iraq's oil for the euro under the Oil for Food program. And 1 year later, the U.S. screaming nuclear weapons, sarin gas, and all the rest of it, they invade Iraq, they lynch Saddam Hussein, And Iraq's oil is back on the world market, but only for the U.S. dollar. The same thing happened down in Libya, where Gaddafi was just doing a brilliant job of improving the standard of living for the Libyan people. And then he he shuts down the private central bank that was enslaving Libya, creates a state central bank to manage Libya's public currency as a public utility, and he invented a new value-based currency called the gold dinar. And then he announced to the world that if you wanted to buy Libya's oil, you would have to pay for it with that gold dinar. And so the U.S. gins up a phony revolution in there. They kill Gaddafi. They shut down the state central bank, reimpose the private central bank. The gold for the gold dinar has vanished. Nobody knows where that went. And Libya's oil is back on the world market only for the U.S. dollar. General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on this back in 2005 when he said the agenda of the United States of America was to conquer or regime change all of the resource-rich areas of the world and constrain them to selling those resources only for the U.S. dollar, so that anybody who wanted to buy those resources would have to first come to the United States and either borrow dollars at interest or give us agricultural produce and manufactured products in exchange for stacks of the ink and paper. And that was the real agenda, and that's what they've been doing all this time. And it's got nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction or Iran's aggression. That's simply the lies being fed to the American people, because let's be very, very honest. If any of our presidents got up there and said, we want to take your children, possibly cripple them, possibly kill them, because we want the rest of the world to use our particular brand of ink and paper, most parents would have said, you're out of your mind, we're keeping our kids home. And so, in order to get popular support for the war, they had to fill our heads with all of these hallucinations about Saddam is going to attack us in 45 minutes, and Iran is going to build a nuclear bomb somewhere down the road. And that's basically how we got into this thing. This is a war over whose brand of ink and paper is going to be used for global trade and banking for the next 100 years. And it's a ridiculous notion, because back at the end of World War II, when Bretton Woods was first signed, accounts were still being settled with bullion or boxes of paper notes, and a global, recognized, trusted currency made sense back then. But in this age of global, instantaneous financial transactions and confirmation, the idea of a single global currency is obsolete. It's an antique. But that right there, that U.S. dollar hegemonic domination of the world is the only thing that is going to keep the U.S. economy ticking along. And even then, in the long run, it's still doomed to fail.
Yeah, good points. Do you think the left has any way to overturn the current system that we have now with Trump? And you think they're going to riot and potentially create martial law, or what is your opinion on that matter?
Well, first of all, Trump has the key to declaring martial law and a national emergency. Yes, there is no question that the liberal left and the globalists are trying to stir up a color revolution in the United States to bring Trump down, just as they're still trying to find some way to prevent the Brexit from happening, because the Brexit is leading to other European Union nations thinking about leaving the collective, and obviously Donald Trump is not on board with a one-world government, and so Brexit and Trump are a serious threat to this agenda of a global government, and so yeah, that puts him in the crosshairs. But again, if you look at all these covert regime changes that the U.S. has engaged in since the end of World War II, they only succeed about half the time. So it's already a 50-50 proposition. And for any of these color revolutions to work, they must capture the support and sympathy of the general population. So the people are saying, yeah, we want to get rid of this government and bring something new in. Of course, it always turns out the new government is worse for them than what they helped get rid of. But without that popular support, these things falter, and a good example of that was the attempt to stage a color revolution in Iran in 2009, which fell flat on its face when the Iranian people finally realized that the U.S. was planning to put the son of the Shah back onto the throne. And so that fell apart. Looking at the behavior of these liberal crybabies all across America right now, it is not creating a positive public image. And the general population are turning away from them. And so this color revolution is doomed to fail. The only unknown is how much damage and blood is going to be spilled before they give on up, and whether or not they'll try a direct assassination of Donald Trump once they realize the color revolution can't work.
All right, thank you. Have a good weekend, Mike, you and Claire.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, a couple of things, Mike. I just, when I got home, I was looking at my Facebook, and I see that Rand Paul says that Elliot Abrams is not getting that job. That is good.
Yeah, that is good. Yeah, a member just posted confirmation at the website, and Trump yanked the plug on that one. And this is consistent with what Corsi was saying, that we may see a very high-level seismic shift in the White House staff, including the Chief of Staff himself.
Okay, the other thing is, this is not so nice. All the fake news media, I seen this when I was at the gym. It was up in the on their, the TVs there, both the Crap News Network and Fox Neocon fake news.
Mm-hmm.
They had something about General Flynn. He may have talked to the Russian ambassador about sanctions before Trump actually took office, blah, blah, blah. They seem really determined to try to get rid of Flynn. They're trying to, because remember, Flynn is the one who said that the weapons were being smuggled to terrorists to try to overthrow Assad. This was back, I think, in like 2012 or something.
Yes.
And Obama fired him. I don't think he actually fired him. I think he was forced to resign over that, to retire over that. And Flynn is dangerous, not dangerous to us, dangerous these neocon globalists and others. And I really hope that Trump sticks with him and doesn't let this happen. I mean, I would be very disappointed and disgusted if Trump caved in and either took his job away, gave him some other job other than National Security Advisor, or fired him. It would really disgust me because Flynn was with him from the get-go. I'm sure Flynn has advised him over what's been going on with the bombing of Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, I'm sure of that, and I'm not hearing anything that Trump has a problem with General Flynn. And you need to be very, very clear about General Flynn talking with the Russian ambassador. First of all, ambassadors are there to be talked to. If they were talking about the sanctions, it's a non-issue. It's a violation of the Logan Act only if General Flynn made some kind of a deal with the ambassador with a quid pro quo. In that case, he's stepping across the line and conducting foreign policy without the permission of the White House and the State Department. But the General Flynn can talk to the Russian ambassador about anything at all, and it's not a problem. In fact, that's keeping the lines of communication open. Well, General Flynn can talk to the Russian ambassador as a private citizen, and it's not an issue unless they make a deal. Now, I'll give you the counterexample. As you know, during Jimmy Carter's presidency, there was the October surprise, where Carter was trying to get the Iranian hostages rescued to present to the American people in October so that he would win the election win re-election the following month. The rescue effort failed. Indications are it was sabotaged. And then we found out that Republicans had made a deal with Iran to hang on to the hostages until Reagan won. And if you remember, as soon as Reagan won the election and became president, Iran released the hostages. And apparently the Republicans offered them all kinds of weapons to go along with this, to simply refuse to negotiate with Jimmy Carter for the release of the Iranian hostages. That does constitute a violation of the Logan Act because the Republicans, and George Herbert Walker Bush was among that group, by the way, they were conducting foreign policy outside the authority of the White House and the State Department, which at that time were a part of the Carter administration. So you can talk about anything you want with anybody unless it's classified, and that's a separate issue. It becomes a violation only if General Flynn, while not being officially part of the administration, made some kind of a deal with the Russian ambassador. And until they can prove that, it's just another media smear job.
Yeah, but you know the fake news. Fake news will make it out, look at it like that had something to do with the election or something like that, that it shows that the Russians knew they were helping Trump.
Nobody's watching that. Nobody's watching the corporate media anymore. That's why all these newspapers are using Chinese bots to artificially inflate their numbers on their websites, and they're cheating their advertisers by doing that. All right, Mark, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And over in Great Britain, as you know, the European Union is still trying to find some way to arm twist Great Britain to remain connected to the EU one way or another. Basically, Brussels' agenda is to allow the British people to say, we're an independent sovereign nation, but you're still subject to European Union laws and travel rulings and economic decisions, and especially that huge amount of money that Brussels sucks out of Great Britain year after year after year after year. Well, the economic stranglehold is not working, both because of Donald Trump's promise of a fast-track trade deal with the newly independent Great Britain, but Britain is starting to do a lot of trade with non-EU countries, and that's really taking off. Now, over at Nordstrom's, their stock is in decline because apparently, after this clearly political crybaby decision to drop Ivanka Trump's clothing line, women are basically cutting up their Nordstrom's credit cards, and they're boycotting the store. And they should, because the families are off limits. Ivanka Trump is not holding any kind of a government position. In fact, she's stepping away from a lot of what she's been doing to be a mother. Even the mafia says you don't go after the family. And this childish behavior is backfiring, because at core, the American people still believe in a sense of fair play. And that's another reason why all of these liberal tactics are failing and falling apart, because everybody sees that this is not reasonable, responsible adult behavior going on. Sears, as you know, is, of course, an iconic American brand. I remember as a kid, you know, the Sears catalog would show up. Oh, we'd look at all the really cool things. And then the parents would tear out the lingerie ads so they wouldn't pollute our little minds. Sears has announced they're going to do a restructuring, and they claim they're going to be able to eliminate $1 billion in costs. Now, maybe they're going to go back to being a mail order operation or online operation. Most retail stores, the brick and mortar stores, are blaming online sales for their decline. We know the reality. People just don't have money to buy things anymore. And that's the reality. But these executives, they're just looking for a convenient scapegoat. Now, here's a rather interesting development. Over at the Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve Governor, Daniel Tarullo, has announced his resignation effective April. Now, he is the top Federal Reserve official charged with financial regulations. And he announced his resignation just 1 week after Trump said that he was going to undertake a review of what they see as onerous bank rules. So he's going to resign there. Now, he's been there since 2009. He helped shape their response to the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud meltdown. In other words, he was one of the authors of, let's just take the money from the American people and pour it all over Wall Street and everything will be okay. Now, Tarullo was holding that position as an appointee, but he was never actually formally confirmed, and his replacement has not been named. So it looks like there's going to be a shuffling over at the Federal Reserve. Now, apparently some U.S. senators mostly Democrats, are trying to craft a bill that would give Congress the authority to veto Donald Trump if he tries to ease sanctions against Russia or presumably Iran. In other words, to usurp the authority of the president in this area. It's a violation of the separation of powers, but it reveals how desperate the war hawks are to keep pushing on Russia, leading to war. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Pardon me. Welcome back to the show. And getting on back to these companies that decided they were going to show their ire with the election of Donald Trump. And they're all suffering harm. Nordstrom's stock is down. Pepsi's stock tumbled when its CEO went out there saying how unsafe she and her employees felt after Trump's election. Macy's has gone down since it decided to go after him. And interestingly enough, Kellogg's CEO is claiming that the layoffs they're having to go through right now are just a coincidence. You know, it's got nothing to do with the Breitbart boycott. Anyway. Let's take a quick phone call. George in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, you were talking earlier about voting irregularities.
Yes.
I may be the rare person that I'm a vote mostly Democrat, and I'd love to see them investigate voting irregularities, because I think they'll find that people voting twice in person is very rare. Changes almost no elections, and there's probably just as much voting irregularity with people casting absentee ballots in multiple states or casting an absentee ballot than going to try and cast a vote in person.
Well, all of those things are in play. I mean, the vote fraud is not confined to a single methodology. They're all in play because the idea is to have so many different things going on, and none of them are really obvious, rather than try something so heavy-handed it does get noticed. But again, down in some of these investigations, they have found that there was that guy, the elections commissioner in New York City, who actually went out public and said what they're doing is they're taking these people, putting them on buses, and they're taking them from precinct to vote over and over and over again because there's no requirement for ID. And we have to have an honest election system within the next 2 years. And that's going to... Go ahead.
What I'd also like to see is make sure that people that are voting absentee ballot have to show an ID to get their absentee ballot. With maybe the lone exception of people in the military serving, maybe they could get somewhere, through the military to show that they are overseas. But
yeah, we would have to allow for that. But in the plan that I'm putting together for an honest election system, somebody who wants to vote absentee would not only have to show their ID, they would have to prove that there is a reason they can't go out to the polls. And just close off this loophole, because these absentee ballots are a major part of the fraud.
Right, but you're looking at the parties, it seems that Republicans tend to vote absentee ballot more than Democrats. So, in most of these states that are doing voter ID, they're not doing voter ID for absentee ballots, just for voting in person.
Well, this last year's election, again, the Democratic lawyers funded by George Soros were getting voter ID laws overturned, and the Department of Justice was helping them. And there were actually very few areas. Say again?
Part of that was because the states weren't doing what they said they were going to do, which is providing IDs for free. They're coming up with all sorts of excuses why they either couldn't do it for free or putting up all sorts of bureaucratic hurdles so that people couldn't get their IDs. That's the main reason why a lot of them were overturned.
Well, I disagree. I disagree. This was clearly a campaign to open up the polls to illegal immigrants and refugees to vote themselves, possession of our nation. Anyway, George, got to let you go. Got a lot of stuff we got to cover, and we'll be getting on back to the news here. Talking about immigration, Secretary of Homeland Security General Kelly wants America to know the wall is going to be built. It'll be well underway within the next 2 years. I still think crocodiles in the Rio Grande would allow them to save a little bit of money. Now, over in Germany, the finance minister, Schäuble, has said in a TV interview, we were flat out not prepared for the extent of the refugee crisis. When this all started, they figured it was just going to be a few, couple of hundred, and they'd give them a new home and everybody would look good, and they were not prepared for this huge, huge migration. And remember, George Soros, non-governmental organizations were out there encouraging these people to migrate to Europe and to the United States of America. They were making all kinds of promises. If you can get there, you're going to get all this free stuff, which didn't happen. And that's a big part of the anger and violence and hostility going on, is because these migrants undertook a very long, difficult trip, and now they're feeling cheated. Now, Angela Merkel is starting to turn her policy around because she understands that her chances for re-election are virtually nil if she keeps on with this open borders policy. And now we are seeing a story coming out of Government Slaves that Merkel is going to start expelling asylum seekers from Germany as support for the migrants' collapses among the German people. So she's finally hearing the voice of the German people about this. And this is all very bad for the European Union and the one world order. Now, a story coming out of the Express is blowing the lid off an attempt by Brussels to keep their talents into Great Britain. And there was this secret plan to tie Britain to the European Union even after Brexit. It was being pushed under the radar. They were hoping people were not going to notice. But basically the deal, which the ministers were going to try and put through without having a vote on now that Parliament has shown they're going with the will of the people. Britain would still be subject to the European Court of Justice after the Brexit and still tied in with the single market rules. In other words, it's a Brexit in name only. And the British people can pretend to themselves they're a sovereign independent nation, but in point of fact, they would still be slaves to the European Union. But the European Union is, in fact, in a lot of trouble. Populists are gaining in Sweden and the Czech Republic. Marine Le Pen is extending her lead. All of these people are Eurosceptics. And the bloc could easily come apart. Now, only a week ago, we were hearing the Chief Commissioner Juncker saying that the solution is to federalize the European Union, to get rid of the idea that these are independent nation states in a collective and basically treat them as federalized states on the model of the United States of America with Brussels as the capital for all. And that suggestion met with fierce opposition. And so Juncker has now changed around. And he's saying, all right, we're going to do a radical shakeup to save the European Union. And now he's saying that he wants to start kicking decisions back to the national governments and get away from so much of the central control. So Juncker has essentially blinked, but I think at this point the damage has been done between the artificial debt creation of the European Central Bank, the bad economic policy that took the debts of really seriously in trouble nations and made them the problems of the nations that had good economies, plus the refugees and the migrants. I think the damage is done. People want out. It was a bad deal. It was only supposed to be a free trade, free travel bloc, and it metastasized into this horrible cancer trying to control absolutely everything. Now, Congress is looking at legislation that will cut legal immigration to the United States in half to try and protect American workers. And I think that's a really good idea. We should not be allowing anybody to come into the United States and take jobs until we have full employment for every American who wants a high-paying job. That's just common sense. It's not what Soros wants, of course. Now, Florida lawmakers have introduced a bill that will ban sanctuary cities within Florida. This one has teeth. It won't just be the federal government these cities are going to have to worry about. It'll be Florida's state government as well. There will be penalties, withholding of funds, possible prosecutions, because all of these sanctuary cities are in violation of the Title VIII provisions regarding the harboring of people who don't have a legal right to be in this country. So there's definitely a pushback. All right, let's get into the science and health news. The other day we were talking about this new Yale University study that shows a clear association between vaccines and brain disorders, and specifically addressed the issue of over-vaccination, because the vaccine companies like to say if you give this child this one vaccine, he's not likely to get any brain damage, although the DTaP vaccine actually admits it can cause autism in that little bit of paper the doctor won't show you. But the issue is over-vaccination, because we're not talking a single shot. We're talking almost 40 at this point. And it's all cumulative. The heavy metals, the contamination, the thimerosal. And now it's being backed up by the revelation that back in 2014, there was a vaccine safety review published by the RAND Corporation. And they came to the conclusion that vaccines are almost certainly causing serious, permanent damage in some children. And so the RAND Corporation is out there. Now, here's where it's getting interesting. First of all, you need to all of a sudden remember how many people involved in this debate themselves have autistic children. Robert De Niro was trying to get vaxxed onto the Tribeca Film Festival because he has an autistic child. There was that, not Rosie O'Donnell, the other one, who was asking if Barron Trump is autistic because she herself has an autistic child and recognized the symptoms. Now, Joe Scarborough has come on out that he has an autistic son. And he told Robert Kennedy Jr., we're going to find out that thimerosal causes autism. And when the American people realize how these pharmaceutical corporations were just reaping billions and billions in profits without concern for the harm their products were causing, that's going to be the wake-up call at just how corrupt the medical industrial complex has become. You remember we're talking about this doctor got sent to prison for 45 years because during his entire career he'd been telling perfectly healthy people they had cancer in order to sell them radiation and chemotherapy treatments. Well, there's a new scandal because there is this clinic that is being sued by 50 people who were told they had Alzheimer's disease. And it turns out they did not. And they were being offered treatments for something they did not have. New study showing a link between Roundup and severe liver damage. It's amazing here. Here's an odd story. Tom Brady's an athlete, very good athlete. He was caught up briefly in that Deflategate scandal. But he's being attacked now because he is asked about what makes him such a great athlete, and he talks about his own personal eating habits. And he adheres to a strict diet that focuses on organic produce, whole grains, lean meats. And the New York Post wrote an article criticizing his diet. And say, really, I mean, that's just going to harm all these corporations, because apparently to the fast food nation, nutrition is a four-letter word. This guy is actually under attack for wanting to eat healthy. We live in a country where the desire to eat safe, healthy, and nutritious food has been declared a mental illness called orthorexia nervosa. If you want to prove you're mentally healthy, you will chow down on that big giant grease burger. Now, over at the University of Nottingham, they've just completed a study which has found, to nobody's surprise, antidepressants are linked with higher rates of suicide and self-harm, which we've been telling you for years is the case, and now we have another confirmation. Speaking of GMO damage, as you know, ever since GMO pollen came on the scene, we've been seeing bee populations decline, and it's been blamed on microwave towers and mites and all this other stuff here. But Nature magazine several years ago did a study in which they demonstrated that GMO pollen is actually harmful to insects. In that particular article, they were trying to find the reason the monarch butterfly population was in decline. And they discovered that butterflies that were feeding on flowers of GMO plants and taking the pollen into their body were producing malformed larvae. And caterpillars, if you will. And the caterpillars would not properly metamorphose into the butterflies. And this was actually demonstrated within a laboratory situation. GMO pollen harms insects. So this is a big problem for organic farmers. Now, obviously, Monsanto would be perfectly happy if all the bees went away, because without the bees, we would all be dependent on their GMO seeds, and they would make lots and lots of money out of us. So imagine our amazement here when GovernmentSlaves.info is running this story that apparently somebody is suggesting it's time to build robot bees to pick up the pollination slack. It sounds like a cool idea. I imagine they would look more like tiny drones rather than actual bees. But this is going to put a huge cost burden on farmers to do this. And they won't have their own robot bees. There'll be companies that have the bees that go from field to field to field to do the pollination. Much as in the days of bee shortages, there are now companies that have beehives on flatbed trucks where they will drive from farm to farm to farm, let the bees do their thing, and they get paid money. But we are becoming, unfortunately, more dependent on these artificial processes which can break down rather than living and working within the mechanisms of nature. And I'm very sympathetic to the farmers, having been a farm kid. I'm very sympathetic to the beekeepers because I briefly kept bees myself as a child until we discovered my middle brother was allergic to bee stings and I had to smoke my hives. But I understand what they're dealing with right there. So that's what's going on. Now then, in the last bit of time going up to the top of the hour and the arrival of the lovely Lady Claire, Lake Oroville, that situation is deteriorating. They are forced to let the water continue down that damaged spillway because of the runoff from the heavy rains that have been occurring in California. They tried to stop the spillway for a little bit to survey the damage, and it is continuing to erode, and the erosion is now outside the spillway and down both embankments. If the water continues to rise, they're going to have to allow it to go through an emergency spillway that is unpaved. It's just a dirt trench, and it will just slide down there with trees, rocks, everything else in its way. It's already destroying the commercial fishing downstream. We'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to the show, and we're talking about the dam at Lake Oroville, which is a gigantic dam. It holds back a huge amount of water, and of course what we're getting from official sources is it's going to be okay, it's not a problem, nobody's in any danger. And all of a sudden today they're starting to change their tune, saying, well, we're in uncharted territory. And one of the things that has happened is the debris, the turbidity of the water coming on down that spillway is now threatening the commercial fish hatcheries in the region, and they're literally going on out trying to move these young fish. And the problem is they're still too young to openly, safely release into the wild. There'll be an immediate lunch for something else. And so there's going to be an impact there as well. All right, as I mentioned earlier in the show, apparently 30 of the major volcanic systems in Iceland are showing elevated activity. The whole planet seems to be rocking and rolling right now. Story coming on out here, why the melted fuel under Fukushima could poison our planet with nuclear radiation for thousands of years, and that's certainly true. The question is, what level? Now, obviously, we're exposed to small amounts of radiation all the time. You might be amazed to find out, if you go to an art gallery with classic paintings, and you're standing in front of paintings that have bright yellow in them, those are radioactive, because uranium oxide is this bright, pretty yellow, and it was used as a paint pigment until somebody discovered nuclear physics. If you have an antique camera lens, it might have thorium glass in it. That's a beta emitter. And, of course, living here in Hawaii, we're all on top of cooled, hardened lava, which is also naturally radioactive. The issue is, the higher the radioactivity goes, the greater the chance it's going to cause a problem, up to the point where the radiation is so intense that it can kill you. And we're already seeing mutated life all around Fukushima. And the big concern, of course, is contamination from Pacific seafood. See, a brief exposure to radiation, that's one thing. The real danger is if you inhale or ingest a radioisotopic particle, and it can be microscopic and impossible to find and remove, and it just stays in your body emitting and emitting and emitting and emitting. Now, for short period isotopes, that's one thing, but some of these isotopes are going to last longer than you will. And sooner or later, you're going to start developing some problems. Back when the whole issue about cigarettes was going on, in a way, the tobacco companies were honest in saying that tobacco didn't cause cancer, because what was causing the cancer was the cheap mined mineral fertilizer that was radioactive. And the tobacco plants would take up that radioactivity and put it in the leaves, and that's what made cigarettes cause cancer. We're going to do a break for station identification. We're going to be back with the lovely Lady Claire after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And for those of you watching on BAM Music TV, this gorgeous creature behind me is the lovely Lady Claire. And for all of those people who were emailing saying that they wanted to see more of her, in the bottom half of the hour, we're going to trade places, and you'll be able to admire her greatly. So what is the first thing that you want to talk about?
Well, I've got to tell you, I'm a little bit annoyed with the Trump administration right now.
Well, a lot of company on that one.
Yeah, apparently. Now, you know what day today is, right? What celebration in Iran is happening?
Yes.
Yes. Let's share with our listeners and readers. It is the anniversary of the 1979 overthrow of the Shah. And apparently, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has not really been very happy about Trump's threats over Iran's program after the Middle Eastern power fired a missile last week. Trump had warned that Iran was on notice and playing with fire, but Tehran is continuing its missile drills, firing another weapon on Sunday. Tehran has now warned the U.S. and Iran have, quote-unquote, dark days ahead, and apparently thousands flooded the streets in Tehran with banners reading, "Down with USA." Earlier this week, Khamenei struck back after a meeting with his military leaders and promised the nation is planning to respond to mark today's anniversary of the Iranian Revolution in '79. And since the Trump administration has threatened to blacklist Iran's elite military force, the Revolutionary Guards, tensions are very, very high. Well, I have a memo to President the Art of the Deal, Trump. I sure hope to heck you've got Vlad, the non-impaler's, direct cell phone on your speed dial right now. And the reason I am saying this is, if ever you needed to be partnering with Russia to de-escalate this situation through quiet, back-channel negotiations, it is right the doggone heck now. Michael, would you agree with the assessment that any attack against Iran will almost inevitably draw Russia in militarily?
Well, I mean, Iran and Russia are already in negotiations for Russia to resume permanent stationing at an Iranian air base there.
Yeah.
But again, getting back to the art of the deal and knowing that the real agenda is what currency Iran's oil is going to be sold for.
Right.
This could, again, as Trump describes in his book, he goes out there saying, military missiles, you guys are terrorists, you're this or that. And then Iran pushes back until they reach a point where Trump says, you know, if you just go back to selling the oil for the dollar, all of this will go away. And Iran will say, oh, well, yes. But as far as the protests and everything going on in Iran, I mean, let's face it, if you're a country and you have been as abused as Iran has been by the United States government, you're not going to remain entirely cheerful about that.
No, not at all. And I did some digging, I did some research. Apparently, since the overthrow of the Shah in '79, the standard of living in Iran has increased by 76%. Over 70% of their scientists are gals. Yes. We can't even begin to say that here in the United States. What do you think the rate is for women in science?
Well, I can tell you from my days with NASA, nowhere near enough.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, all right. Okay. And I am just hoping, and apparently it's appearing to me that the war hawks have kind of won with this issue on Iran. And I'm hoping that Trump has the smarts to realize that this is a really bad situation if they go in militarily. And, of course, the other issue is the fact that Iran has given notice that it's going to drop the dollar in its business dealings as of the 21st of next month.
Well, again, a word of caution is that Trump is still needing to convince the Warhawk senators he's on their side until he can get all of his confirmations through.
Lover, I just so hope you're right on that.
Okay, well,
I so hope you're right.
The other thing, though, is, again, from Jerome Corsi, we're getting word that there's going to be a major shakeup in the White House staffing because Trump is now aware and alarmed at how many neocons and globalists have succeeded in worming their way into his administration, and that he's about to do a house cleaning that might even include his chief of staff.
Well, let's hope that whoever he replaces, that the new people will have an infinitely more nuanced concept of why the U.S. should go to war, if it ever should, versus negotiations. That's what I'm hoping.
Well, from the point of view of the war hawks, the only way to avoid the collapse of the U.S. economy and the collapse of the federal government is to go to war and force the rest of the world back onto dependency on the U.S. dollar, but it's not going to work. They're already years behind schedule and trillions over budget, and all of these conquered provinces are starting to push back. And ultimately, the United States is not in a position to be able to win in a direct conflict with Russia or China, let alone both of them together. This is a path to doom and destruction for the United States of America. The only question is how bloody they're willing to let it be.
Yeah, I agree. It's a recipe for absolute disaster.
We're going to take a second to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And, of course, as usual, in Friday, hour number 3, the lovely Lady Claire is with us with her perspective on the world. What's your next story?
I have a couple about things going on in Israel for Palestinians. Apparently, Israel has banned the delivery of anesthesia gas to Gaza hospitals, and it's refused to allow its entry. That is something that the Palestinian Ministry of Health revealed today. Now, this is the third time that the occupation has prevented nitrous oxide, which is used for patients during surgery, from entering the besieged enclave. And the ban means a number of urgent medical procedures for Palestinians cannot go forward because it would be torture to try to get the stuff done without having the anesthesia administered. And there are currently, Mike, 200 patients awaiting urgent medical treatment that can't get it now. And in addition, there in the healthcare sector, Gaza needs more than 4,000 kilograms of nitrous oxide each year, noting that the Israeli occupation rations the entry of the gas. You know, and how completely vindictively criminal. You're taking advantage of sick people by not allowing them to have the surgeries they need. I mean, that's collective punishment. That's a war crime right there.
Well, unfortunately, the reality is that nitrous oxide can be used as a rocket fuel, and that's probably Israel's justification.
Yeah.
That's Israel's justification for everything they block from entering Palestine. It could be used for a weapon. It could be used to build a bunker. It could be used to do this. It could be used to do that. But for anybody who understands chemistry or engineering, you can take almost anything that is essential to everyday ordinary life and weaponize it. So under that rationale, Israel could essentially say, we're just going to starve you all to death because no matter what we give you, you could turn it against us. You could take a cheeseburger and frisbee it over the fence into the Dimona plant and cause a nuclear meltdown. I mean, it's ridiculous. And we all know that Israel is not really concerned about nitrous oxide being used as a rocket fuel. This is just Israel being mean and vindictive and punishing and carrying out a slow-motion genocide against the Palestinian people.
Yeah. I think this is one of the reasons why the boycott, divest, and sanction movement must gain critical mass right now.
Well, I think they're at critical mass, which is why you're seeing all of these obviously un-American members of Congress talking about laws to ban protesting the actions of Israel's government, which is a direct violation of the First Amendment.
Yep.
And they're trying to sell this idea of silencing BDS by saying, oh, the BDS movement doesn't really care about Palestinians. They're just anti-Semites and Jew haters, and this is just how they're trying to express their hatred. And it's ridiculous, but Israel has been using this propaganda dodge for longer than I've been alive.
Yeah.
And nobody is criticizing the Israeli people's religion or ethnicity or any of that. What is being criticized justly is the behavior of Israel's government. And the First Amendment exists to recognize the right of the American people to criticize bad behavior by government, any government, anywhere on the face of the earth.
There's also another article that I saw, and this is again in antiwar.com. It's a very sober and intelligently collected news resource, and I encourage people to pop over on there once in a while. Israel has issued talking points on the controversial law concerning seizure of some Palestinian-owned land. Oh yeah, like that's going to help them internationally. It's stealing land. It's this is real annexing.
The talking points aren't going to convince ordinary people. The talking points are the instructions to the corporate media on how to present this and make it look like, it's okay for Israel to do this. And Israel is a master at being able to create this kind of propaganda.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think back to the origins of the nation of Israel, you have, at the end of World War II, the entire world had united together against the Axis powers on the principle that one people do not have a right to simply walk into somebody else's country and take it over for themselves.
Yeah.
Whether it's Germany and Poland or the refugees and illegal immigrants and the United States of America. So in order to create the nation of Israel, Israel had to come up with a propaganda device that was so powerful that the very same people of planet Earth who opposed Germany's taking France would turn around and say, oh, it's okay for Israel to take Palestine. And that's when we started seeing all of the very real horrors of the Nazis being massaged and amplified and turned into this story of a targeted extermination program aimed at the Jewish people only. And it worked. The same nations that opposed Hitler's theft of Europe looked the other way while Israel stole Palestine. And that's why that Orthodox account of the Holocaust is so fiercely protected and defended, because that's the very foundation for Israel's original theft of Palestine. And in the modern world, you can believe anything, question anything, whatever you want. But oddly enough, that Holocaust story is the only facet of history that you can go to jail for asking questions about. And that tells you right there something is being hidden.
Oh, yeah. And to me, there are no talking points on earth that could ever indemnify and hold harmless an Israeli government that practices such a savage serial genocide against Palestinians and steals their land in such a way. And I warned the Palestinians about this years ago on your blog, that if they didn't get their act together and start to agree that the state of Palestine, if it ever happened, would be smaller than the state of Liechtenstein. And the way these...
It would be smaller than the Vatican.
Yeah. The way these settlements, the Israeli settlements have been engineered, completely prevents there from being a contiguous Palestinian state. It's gone, baby, gone.
Yeah, it really, really is. And for me, the issue is that the American people are being forced to pay for these war crimes, which makes us guilty for them.
Yep.
And just as we understand the people of other nations are resisting foreign puppet rule, like Iran did in 1979 on this date, or like the people of Libya are trying to do, or the people of Yemen are trying to do, it's time for the American people to stand up and start resisting our foreign puppet rulers. Because I am just absolutely disgusted and fed up with all of these members of Congress who are willing to sell out the Bill of Rights, to defy the Bill of Rights to serve their masters in Tel Aviv. Yeah. And we know that Israel's penetration of the U.S. Congress did suffer losses in this last election. We've got to keep up that momentum. We have to have members in Congress who remember they work for the American people, not for Tel Aviv, not for Big Pharma, not for the military-industrial complex. We need to restore the Congress to truly being representatives of the American people, not a foreign government that plunders us, loots us, makes us morally responsible for their crimes and atrocities.
I absolutely agree.
And then turns around again with their hand out. What have you done for me today?
Yeah. Very powerful article in globalresearch.ca, which is a Canadian outlet to which I link very frequently. Usually, again, their analyses are very sober. And it said, it's foreign greed and delusion that kills Yemeni children. 10,000s and soon hundreds thousands die in Yemen as a result of zealotry, greed, and bureaucratic infighting of foreign countries. The Wahhabi Saudis fight in Yemen against, apparently, an Iranian Shia that just doesn't seem to be there. And under the eyes of the CIA, they nurture local al-Qaeda forces to do their bidding. The UAE is looking for new ports in Yemen, thereby disturbing Saudi pipeline dreams, and the Pentagon tussles with the CIA over budgets of special operations. The minor local Yemeni conflicts between the various tribes developed into a war due to foreign interference and financing. Bombing campaigns have replaced tribal mediation. And the executive branch of the UN is under intense pressure from the U.S.-Saudi coalition not to report the real consequences of the devastating war on Yemen. Now, folks, those of you who are listening, those of you who are watching on BAM User, on NBC, MSNBC, CNN, any of the alphabet soup corporate outlets, have you heard one word about what's going on in Yemen? If I were a betting woman, I'd bet absolutely no.
No, all we're hearing are the endless celebrities still screaming that Trump won the election. We're going to grab a quick phone call here. Brendan in San Francisco, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Just did a little bit of homework on this Berkeley rioting. I don't know if you got too much into it today, but this organization, BAM, by any means necessary.
Yes.
It turns out that they are funded by Soros.
Yes.
They have a 501c3. They have a web page. You can make tax-free donations or whatnot. But anyway, real quick, this just looks like such a coordinated effort from all sides, media, fake grassroots. And I think real quickly, we just need to get organized ourselves and push back, because I think they're trying to sucker Trump into declaring some form of martial law. I personally have reached out to the Oath Keepers in my area and the California State Militia, and I'm just going to do my due diligence and try to prepare and get organized, because this thing is going to go to the streets, and hopefully Trump, I know he's a chess master at this point, and he hopefully will not declare any type of martial law. Also, the FBI is rounding up some of these so-called protesters, which we know they're just brown shirts, as you say. That's it, Mike. Thank you. Keep up the good work.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. Yeah, it does look like they're trying to do a color revolution here, but my analysis is it's failing simply because nothing that they do is winning popular support. In fact, quite the contrary, they're alienating the people of the United States of America. And just like the attempt at a color revolution in Iran in 2009 has failed, the one here is failing as well. Doesn't mean that we're going to be safe from violence and bloodshed and property destruction. We're still hearing stories where Trump supporters, just wearing their Make America hats, great again, they're getting attacked and literally beaten up walking down the streets. And that, too, is a brown shirt tactic. But I agree that it would be a mistake for Donald Trump to declare martial law, because the corporate media would use that to claim he's a tyrant and a dictator and rise ye American people against the tyrant. So they're not going to be happy until they actually do trigger a civil war and bloodshed in the streets of America. And I would say shame on you for all of that, except they don't have a sense of shame.
No, I think it's been surgically removed.
That's a requirement to join the Church of Liberalology is that you have your shame and your common sense surgically removed.
Absolutely. And that's, again, another good reason, and I know I keep harping on it, like a chip CD. Please be prepared if for any reason you're going to need the stuff probably anyway. Storable food, potable water, extra medications for yourself and your family and your pets. But it really is a reminder, Mike, that we all do need to be prepared. Yes, we need to do our due diligence.
For anything that's going to happen. I mean, in California, it's an earthquake kit. Hawaii, it's the tsunami kit or a hurricane kit. All right, we've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And you wanted to talk some more about what's going on in Yemen.
Yeah, I do, because there's an absolute blackout in corporate American non-news about what's going on here. And apparently...
Chris Cuomo, fake news, fake news, fake news.
The executive branch of the UN is under enormous pressure from the U.S.-Saudi coalition not to report on the real consequences of the devastating war on Yemen. And the Saudi military has been conducting what can only be described as a scorched earth campaign in Yemen and committing war crimes and atrocities with impunity in this beleaguered, desperately poor country whose only collective sin was kicking out its Western-centric puppet Mansour al-Hadi. Children, women, and the medically fragile and elderly are being gleefully slaughtered by the Saudi military in numbers that absolutely constitute a genocide against the Yemeni people. Infrastructure is getting destroyed daily, and unfortunately the U.S. is complicit in these war crimes because they are providing the targeting for the missiles the Saudis are using, and President Trump just okayed the selling of more of these missiles to both Bahrain and to Saudi Arabia. And to those of you who have looked at the website and seen my article and clicked on the images, yeah, I'm going to tell you something. They were the most graphically gruesome I could find of the slaughter. And also the fact that the Saudis are blocking food from getting in. Children are dying of malnutrition. I mean, we don't expect to see this in the 21st century, and yet you're seeing ribs sticking out, you're seeing brain shut down. It's really horrible. And the reason I did it, I think we the people need to have a conversation among ourselves and then with our governmental representatives about what U.S. foreign policy is accomplishing in Yemen, because apparently it's nothing good. And the only way the situation is going to be ultimately resolved is politically. This war has dragged on
if there was a
long time.
If there was a political solution, they would have gone that route. This is just flat-out conquest of the world's resource-rich areas for the benefit of the American banking cartel.
Yeah.
And there's no political solution to that because no nation is going to say, yes, we will gladly enslave ourselves to your banking system. All right, we got to take a quick phone call here before this next commercial break. Nick in Southern California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike and Claire. I was calling to talk about Syria, Assad, and Amnesty International, but first I wanted to give a new name to these fake grassroots organizations.
Okay.
I want to call them AstroTurf organizations.
That's actually been used before to describe them, but yes.
I love it. I love it. And you were going to talk about Syria?
I wish I would have thought of it. Yes, so, the question, I haven't heard anything since a few days ago with this 5,000 to 13,000 people being, quote-unquote, secretly hanged. And a couple of issues I had with the way it was being presented is, was it really a secret, number one? Number two, did it really happen? And number three, how much clout does Amnesty International have? Like, are people really going to believe what they say? Do they have that kind of pull with the world?
And not as much as they used to, partly because Amnesty International's report was obviously written to be inflammatory, and it's striking most people as another pathetic attempt to demonize Assad. First, it was his chemical weapons. He was gassing his own Alawite supporters. And then it was, we have to invade Syria to take care of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That's not working out. This is just another piece of propaganda to convince the American people it's okay to send our children into Syria to be killed and crippled for some noble purpose, according to the New York Times here. Anyway, listen, we're coming up on a commercial break, and thank you for the call, Nick. We're going to let you go here, and we're going to close the phone lines for the rest of the show, because for the rest of the show, Claire's going to be sitting in the center seat here, and she doesn't know how to push quite all the buttons just yet.
I don't know how to push any of the buttons just yet.
This is her trial by ordeal.
Trial by fire.
So be gentle with my lady love here.
Thank you, dear.
And quick little insert before the commercial break. Seattle has just divested from Wells Fargo over the Dakota Access Pipeline, so that fight is definitely not over. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And, of course, for those of you on BAM User, there's the lovely Lady Claire for you to admire greatly. So what is your next story?
The next story, and I almost could not believe this when I read it, and this comes from, again, another pretty responsible resource online, Blacklisted News. Apparently, Saudi lobbyists are recruiting our American veterans to kill the 9/11 lawsuit. And using a lot of cash and misinformation, Saudi Arabia is luring well-meaning U.S. military veterans into its campaign to eviscerate a recently passed law allowing 9/11 families to sue the monarchy for its alleged role in facilitating the attacks that killed 3,000 people.
Well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense here, because Saudi Arabia didn't have anything to do with 9/11.
No.
It's just another way to victimize Saudi Arabia and protect Israel. And again, if you want to know if you're being lied to, look for what should be there and isn't. And in all this brouhaha that is now trying to blame Saudi Arabia for 9/11, after having blamed it on Iraq and Afghanistan and who knows all else, you have to look, why would Saudi Arabia do it? Saudi Arabia has become very, very rich with their petrodollar partnership with the United States of America. They've made billions, trillions of dollars off of this deal. They've invested much of that money back in the United States, and they certainly don't want to do anything that's going to allow the United States to seize that money. If somebody in Saudi Arabia decided they didn't like the United States anymore, they don't need to crash airplanes into buildings to do it.
Just pull the money.
Just take the money back on out.
Yeah.
But this is total nonsense, and I think Saudi Arabia, is perfectly justified in doing whatever they need to do to push back on this ridiculous law, because the law specifically says no harm has to be proven. It is guilt by accusation, and that is so un-American on the face of it.
I hear you, Michael, but let me tell you what is upsetting me with regard to our veterans, who I think our country needs to do a much better job of taking care of. Specifically, lobbyists are telling veterans that if other countries reciprocate by passing laws like the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism, military service members and veterans will be sued in foreign courts. This is not going to happen, and I am just absolutely gobsmacked at the brazenness of this approach. I don't see it as being right or moral, and 19 other million ways.
Wait a minute. I mean, other countries are already talking about having reciprocal laws to say that the U.S. can be sued for damages without needing to prove actual direct connection. It's like when we talked about the U.S. Engaging in torture and other violations of the Geneva Convention. It opened up the door for these other countries to torture our kids and to violate the Geneva Conventions.
But have these other countries actually passed similar reciprocal laws yet?
No, but they're talking about it. Okay. They're waiting to see if our Supreme Court will tear this down, because it very obviously it's just a way to plunder Saudi Arabia, to try and frame Saudi Arabia for 9/11 as part of the continuing program to keep the focus off of the fact that the only people arrested near the World Trade Towers on 9/11 were Israel's. They were Mossad agents.
Yeah, I know, I hear you. But still kind of threatening our veterans in this way before other laws are actually passed, it just... I feel very uncomfortable, and I do agree with you. I hope that the Supreme Court does just throw it out. But for Saudi Arabia to be doing this to our vets, it just feels so wrong. I'd like to kind of bop on over now to the NATO allies locking in supports for standoff with Russia. And apparently immediately after Trump was elected, U.S. diplomats urged Lithuania to rush through an agreement to keep American troops on its soil, reflecting alarm that the new Russia-friendly U.S. president might try to stop more deployments in Europe. And the agreement was signed just days before Trump's inauguration, according to a document from the Lithuanian Defense Ministry, and became the first step in locking in the new U.S. president into a NATO strategy to deter Russia in Poland and the Baltics. And then the writers of this article for Reuters stepped in it following Moscow's 2014 annexation of Crimea.
Yeah, they're still pushing that one here. But, I mean, look at it. NATO's going out to other countries and saying, let us put our troops on your soil. They're trying to get more countries to come into NATO that don't want to be part of NATO.
Yeah.
We can see who the expansionist aggressor is here.
It's not
and
Russia.
It's not Russia.
Heck no.
And I certainly think the American people need to wake up and realize, and I understand you don't want to deal with this, but in this coming World War, we're the bad guys.
I know that.
50 years from now, the world is going to look on the Stars and Stripes with the same revulsion and disgust our generation looks on the swastika.
Mike, I hear you. You know, you're talking to the converted, absolutely.
And I don't want our great-grandchildren, collectively, to have to live with the same kind of imposed collective guilt that the people of Germany are suffering under today, even though none of them were alive when all of this World War II nonsense went down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we need to look at the facts about what happened to Crimea and why it happened regarding the spring of 2014 when the duly elected president of Ukraine, Yanukovych, was thrown under the proverbial bus in a U.S., NATO, IMF-sponsored putsch, and Poroshenko was anointed as their president in an election that was more crooked than a dog's hind leg. I mean, come on.
He was installed, and then a few months later they had an election to sort of legitimize his leadership, but the election was, obviously just for show.
And even President Obama admitted that the U.S. had brokered a deal in support of regime change in Kiev. Apparently the writers of this article are either painfully ignorant of this reality or have an agenda of their own to sell the readers.
Well, they want to keep their jobs. And remember what Swinton said. You know, if any of us ever dared put our real opinions into the paper, we would be out of work the next day.
Yeah. Also, they seem to have forgotten that Victoria Nuland, Undersecretary of State in the Obama administration, bragged about how they spent $5 billion to destabilize Ukraine. And, you know, if you look at the presentation that she made, and it's still up there have, by the way, been some websites that have pulled that down. But when you watch her and you listen to her in that address, you just can't unsee that. You just can't. And additionally, Ms. Nuland further thoroughly embarrassed herself and the U.S. government with the now infamous taped the EU declaration. Which was from a call that was leaked, the Nuland Piat call, in 2014. And the people who were the leaders in Crimea realized they didn't have a legitimate government at all in Kiev. So they did a two-part procedure. First, in a free and fair referendum, they asked the people of Crimea if they wanted to stay with Ukraine or if they wanted to petition Russia to join the Russian Federation. And overwhelmingly, and I think it was like 97%, Mike, wasn't it about that?
It was almost unanimous here, where first they seceded from Ukraine, which they are allowed to do under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the United States, as a member of the United Nations, is obligated to respect that right.
Yes, but apparently the thinking of both the U.S. and Ukraine, this peaceful self-determination that you just talked about, cannot possibly exist for Crimeans. So use these decisions by the Crimean people post-putsch to declare that Russia had annexed Crimea, which never actually happened, and use that as the basis to just layer on and, a bunch of sanctions against Russia, which never should have happened in the first place. Now, Mike, I am hoping that President Trump has the smarts to realize Russia's not going to invade the Baltic states or anyone else unless it gets really, really, really provoked. But there appear to be some people in NATO who are hell-bent to start a war with Russia. And Russia has responded to this NATO buildup asymmetrically. Very early this year, the U.S. sent special forces to the Russian border as NATO was poised to allegedly strike back against Vladimir Putin's aggression. And, Mike, have you been able to validate that Russia has deployed nuclear-ready missiles in the province of Kaliningrad, which borders Lithuania?
I thought they had deployed S-400s in Kaliningrad and around Moscow.
In Moscow, yeah.
I don't know that they've actually fielded nuclear weapons just yet.
Yeah.
That would definitely be a move that would be used against Putin in the corporate media.
A heavy provocation.
But,
yes.
you know, again, the Russian people remember what happened in World War II and how close the Nazi army got to Moscow. Mm-hmm. They're not going to let it get that far this time. And the Russians are fierce fighters. Everyone's always talking about, you know, the supposed 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, and they don't realize how many Russians died keeping Hitler's army from reaching Moscow, and it's a huge, huge number.
Millions and millions, I seem to remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, grand total, World War II, 60 million people were killed.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were Russians.
Yeah, it was intense, but that was what they were willing to do to keep the Nazis out. You know, they made that decision. I'd like to go into the area of science and health. Apparently, new vaccines are still causing autism, and the United States government knows it. Now, there was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Thompson who has been taking confidential documents to a congressional subcommittee and made the accusation that the CDC intentionally concealed their evidence that African American boys under 36 months have a higher risk of autism after receiving the MMR vaccine. The documents also proved that the CDC has known for a long time that neurological tics indicating brain disturbances were also associated with thimerosal-containing vaccines, such as influenza vaccine. And Mike, my response to this may be a little bit draconian, but here comes. The CDC should collectively be sued out of existence, and those executives who signed off on deleting the negative information from these studies should be criminally charged, convicted, and serving the hardest jail time possible to prevent this kind of damage from ever happening to our kids again in the name of big pharma profits.
Well, you need to remember, first of all, that like the Federal Reserve, the CDC is not actually a part of the government. They like to pretend that they are.
No.
They even use a .gov extension on their website URL.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But the reality is it is a private corporation. Most of its funding comes from the very pharmaceutical corporations they're supposed to be keeping an eye on.
Right.
The CDC has their own vaccine patents, more than 20 of them, off of which they make $4.5 billion every single year. And like any other corporation with that kind of cash flow, they're going to protect the cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
And when this starts to come apart, and of course we've got the Yale study, now we've got the RAND study coming on out, we've got Trump's Vaccine Safety Commission and Robert Kennedy looking at this whole situation. When it starts to come on out, it is going to come on out that the CDC and these pharmaceutical companies have known all along this damage was being caused, and at that point they are going to be sued out of existence.
Good.
And make way for new corporations and new entities that are going to understand that they have a social responsibility that extends over and above generating the maximum profit for their stockholders.
Well, I certainly hope so, because this kind of travesty should not be tolerated and cannot be allowed to continue.
We can't survive it.
No.
By 2030, half of all children will be diagnosed as autistic, and that means half of the entire population of the United States will not be available to the workforce, and a significant portion of the available workforce is going to be tied up caring for these autistic people. Yeah. There won't be enough workers around to fulfill all the necessary jobs to keep society going.
Yeah.
So maintaining the roads, repairing the dam at Oroville, and the rest of it. You can't run an economy on just taking one half of the population, taking care of the other half. There's no way to pay for any of it. Yeah. It's an economic threat to the United States, and I hope Donald Trump appreciates that as he's evaluating this reality. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, as this becomes more contentious in the media, we're having more and more people that are famous coming on forward and saying, yeah, I've got an autistic child as well. And like Joe Scarborough, and he's obviously convinced vaccines are an issue. Robert De Niro didn't say that they are, but he said there's a legitimate area for questioning. And I think Trump's involvement is because I agree that Barron Trump does seem to have a mild autism spectrum disorder, and I don't wish to be cruel or unkind to him. But if Trump has also reached the conclusion that the vaccines are to blame, then it's going to be time to undo this.
Absolutely. One of the first jobs I ever had out of college was working as a musical therapist for profoundly retarded and physically handicapped kids who were being housed and cared for in a private institution. And looking at these kids, I mean, I could just imagine the heartbreak of the parents who could no longer care for them in a home setting because they either got violent, they couldn't communicate, and just absolutely heartbreaking to parents who are dealing with this. So it is a national scandal. I think it is a national emergency, and I do hope President Trump decides to take care of it in an intelligent and dramatic way, because it's an issue that's not going to go away. And unless and until people are compelled to tell the truth, Americans are going to go along blindly believing that these vaccines are going to be helpful to their kids, when in fact they may be harmful. Now, having said that, I'm not 100% anti-vax. When Mike came out of the hospital a couple of years ago from pneumonia, and I talked to my sister-in-law, who's a very bright gal and a nurse practitioner, I said, what do I do? And she said, I think you really need to think about getting the pneumovax shot. And I said, okay, I'm going to do that. And I did, because it was specific to one thing that I was dealing with. But it wasn't a multiple vaccine. It was one vaccine. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to get sick with pneumonia. It simply means the pneumonia is not going to kill you. So to all parents and people who love their kids and kids in the immediate family and neighbors' kids, let's all sit back for a moment and do the due diligence. Mike, weren't you telling me the other day that various doctors in certain states where vaccines are mandated slip the schools a note and say the kid doesn't need a vaccination?
Yeah, that's been a real. I mean, just like the cafeteria at Monsanto does not serve GMO food. Mm-hmm. Doctors who are in states where vaccines are mandated, mm-hmm. Where the only possible exception is a medical exception, they're writing the notes for their own children to not have to go through these shots. And there's the music. We've got to take a break. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Final segment of our Pauhana show, Pauhana Friday show, rather. And Claire, you had one more story you wanted to share with us.
Yes, I do. There is apparently in upcoming U.S. South Korean military exercises a strategy to destroy North Korean missiles to be applied. Apparently, this is a bilateral U.S.-South Korean strategy to detect, defend, disrupt, and destroy North Korean missiles, also known as 4D, and it's to be applied to the upcoming Key Resolve joint military exercises, which happen next month in March. The 4D operations jointly approved in November of 2015 were first implemented in drills in 2016. And apparently, in March, the strategy is to become more concrete. The command post exercises are to simulate a full-scale war scenario that assumes the deployment and readiness of THAAD, the U.S. missile defense system, at its designated location in central South Korea.
That's the Theater High Altitude Defense Missile.
Yeah, that's the big guns, folks.
Yes.
Yeah. And details were discussed during recent talks between U.S. Defense Secretary Mathis and his Seoul, Korea counterpart, Han Min-koo, a Seoul defense official, told Yonhap. Now, folks, I'm having one of these, reading that. And let me explain why. And I do have a memo for both the U.S. and South Korean governments. Such exercises as those described in this article are simply going to push Kim Jong-un, who is not exactly the most mentally hinged leader I have seen in the last 30 years. They're just going to push him to accelerate his drive for guidable, get-where-they're-going nuclear weapons. Now, if both countries really wanted to reduce this possibility, what they need to do, and this is going to be hard because remember back at the G20 in China last year, where President Obama did this incredible job of dissing China completely in the host country of China. But what the U.S. and South Korea need right now is China's cooperation to get the North Korean government back to the negotiating table and negotiate in goodwill for a peace treaty to replace the existing armistice with guarantees on trade, etc., freedom of navigation, in exchange for North Korea stopping its nuclear weapons program.
Which North Korea would not be engaging in if it wasn't for all this saber-rattling coming from the United States.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous for the United States to be invading countries and overthrowing countries and drone-striking countries and carrying on all of this and then acting indignant that other nations aren't taking common-sense steps to deter American aggression.
Yeah.
I mean, we were all sold the need for America's nuclear arsenal to deter somebody from attacking us. Doesn't that also apply to countries like Iran and North Korea, who do not wish to be invaded? And again, it is this hypocritical double standard that we're all supposed to just swallow as if it's the gospel truth that our nukes are good and everybody else's nukes are bad. All right, there's the music. It's time for us to get on out of here. We're going to head into our weekend, actually. Yes. And we'll be back Monday on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, share what you know with everybody that you know, and aloha, America.